Hello, everyone. Good evening to those of you on my side of the world, and good morning to those of you over on the side of the world with today's guest, Neil Edmond, who is the founder of MoneyTime. I am so delighted to have Neil here today. MoneyTime has been a faithful sponsor and collaborator with Humility and Doxology and the Homeschool Conversations podcast over the past year or so. And I wanted to make sure to bring Neil on so he could talk to you about MoneyTime and how it can be a great option as an elective for your homeschool this year. So Neil, would you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your family, and how you got started with MoneyTime?
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me on your podcast. So it's a pleasure. I'm, as you said, I'm from New Zealand. I grew up in one of the southern cities here, Dunedin, and went to university there. Got a BCom and an LLB. But then spent most of my career in my own marketing consultancy. And during that time, I got married to a childhood friend, Monique, and we have 3 great kids. They're all in their early 20s. 2 of them are at university, and one has left and has a job in media. They're very sporty. 2 of them have been world champions in their style of karate. And one has won an international rowing medal. So very proud of our kids. And they've taken up a lot of our time, as you can imagine, as parents over the years. But now that they're left home, Monique and I have got more time to do the things that we enjoy doing. So we're doing a lot of yoga and going for walks, and we like going out and we like going to the theatre. So it's a nice stage of life for us. Things are a little bit more relaxed, and we can enjoy doing, as I said, some of the things that we really enjoy doing. So as I said, I had my own marketing consultancy for 20 years, but I got to a point where I've always wanted to make a difference in other people's lives, and I felt like I wasn't doing enough. And I've always felt like I wanted to leave a legacy, something that was really important and helped a lot of people. And yes, I was helping people with my marketing consultancy, but not on as big a scale as I wanted to. And it was when my youngest son came home from school one day. He was 15 at the time, and he had applied for a holiday job. And he said to me, "Dad, what's the difference between a wage and a salary?" And I looked at him, 15 years old. He's a bright guy. And I thought, you don't know the difference between a wage and a salary? I thought that was just obvious. I thought everybody knew that. And I said, don't they teach you that sort of thing at school? And he said, no. And I said, do they teach you anything about personal finance, about money? And he said, no. And I thought, gee, I had just assumed that they would, because I hadn't been teaching my kids much about money. I just assumed that they would either pick it up or be taught. And the more I thought about it, and the more I started asking around other parents about their experience, they all came back with the same thing. Their kids hadn't been taught, and they were concerned that their kids were growing up with a serious lack of knowledge around money. So I researched some programs that I could find online. Couldn't find anything I thought was all that good, and so I thought, well, maybe this is what I'm here to do. This could be my opportunity to create that legacy. So I continued researching, ended up writing my MoneyTime program, which is an online program for kids aged 10 to 14, and did a whole bunch of testing on students here in New Zealand, launched it into New Zealand schools 4 years ago. We're in nearly half the primary schools or elementary schools here in New Zealand now, and now we're spreading our wings, and we're promoting the program around the world. And we're in South Africa, Australia, and the United States at the moment, and we have plans to go further afield.
That's so exciting to see how it has blossomed and grown. And really, I can hear it starting from this desire you had for your own children to understand the way money works. And, so often we think it'll, like you said, like they'll just sort of pick it up or it'll just happen. But like so many other things, if we're not prioritizing teaching it to our children, we might have missed something really important. And what could be more important than making sure they know how to make wise choices with their money? I mean, starting at such a young age, you start getting the credit card, things in the mail, or, hey, come give us a bunch of money to do this, that, or the other. And if they haven't had a mindset to be taught how to think wisely about their money, they're kind of at the mercy of the marketers.
That's absolutely right. And I think the reason that a lot of parents don't teach their kids is that they're embarrassed to admit that they don't have all the answers. And they're embarrassed to admit that they haven't done as well as they might have if they'd known more. I think that's fundamentally the reason why. There's a bunch of other reasons. But I think deep down, as parents, we're just embarrassed that we don't have all the answers. And so rather than open that can of worms, we just go, that's fine, we stumbled through, we're okay, so they'll pick it up and they'll be okay. But I don't think they are going to be okay. I think things are a lot tougher now than they were for us when we were growing up, principally because the cost of housing has risen so quickly and so fast compared to what people earn, that it's so much harder for people to get into property or buy their own properties now, or even rent property as a place to live. It's that much harder. And combine that with children growing up in an age of instant gratification, they expect to get what they want now. And so it seems to be quite normal for them and their peers, and quite possibly their parents, to go into debt to get what they want now. And then that just snowballs. That becomes a habit. They keep increasing their debt, and before they know it, they're in trouble. They're maxed out on their credit cards. They can't pay off a personal loan. They've got a massive student debt. And that seriously impacts their ability to start getting ahead in life, because in their early 20s, or whenever it is, they've got this debt that they're trying to pay off. That's when they should be starting to save money to put towards their education, or to invest in property, to buy property, or even just to invest. And so it's seriously sort of limiting their ability to get ahead. And so often they're not in a position to put down a deposit on a house until much later on in their life than what we grew up. And I really think that makes it really tough for kids. And they don't know any better unless we tell them. We have to, it's our duty to explain to them, if you get into debt, A, it costs you more because you're having to pay interest on it. And then B, it's going to set you back on your way to achieving whatever goals you want to in life. And so, it's our responsibility to explain that to them and say, stay out of debt, or at least minimize it as much as you possibly can. Don't buy it. If you've got cash, it's best to pay cash if you possibly can. Save, don't have the cash, save up until you've got it and then spend it. That's a tough message for kids, because most of their peers and parents don't have that mindset. So we need to reset that mind frame, I think, and go back to the good old-fashioned way of, you don't buy it unless you can afford to pay for it in cash. So that's just one of the lessons that we teach in MoneyTime.
Yeah. And I love that perspective about money. One of the things I noticed as I was doing some lessons with Grace was not talking about money as just this thing to accumulate to be able to buy more stuff for yourself, although that's certainly part of, we use money to buy the things we need or even want, but also talking about it in terms of the freedom it gives you to not be in bondage to the debt, right? So you have freedom to make choices, and then freedom to also be more generous. So I appreciated that perspective a lot. I did want to ask a question. So when you made MoneyTime, the primary age range for the online class is for ages 10 to 14. It's a self-paced online class that kids can do on their own or do alongside parents. So why did you choose the 10 to 14 age? I see things like designed for high school, like, oh no, last ditch effort for my senior before they go off to college, make sure they understand money. But why did you choose to focus on this sort of middle age for kids?
Sure, that's a great question. I actually think that high school is too late to be starting to teach them this stuff. At age 10 to 14, that's when they're starting to have any sort of meaningful money that they're earning for themselves. It's usually through for chores, allowance, etc. They're earning their own money, and then they're getting to spend their own money. And so they can see the direct correlation between the effort they put in and the purchasing power that gives them out the other side. That's the best time, I think, to get them right at the start of that process, of that experience. So if we teach them good habits at that point, then those habits are much more likely to carry them through as they get older. We're trying to get them to avoid that debt situation. That's the crux of it. We're trying to get them to avoid debt, accumulate the money so that they can invest it, and then that money just grows naturally through the investment. 10 to 14 is a very impressionable age. I think back to when I was a 12-year-old, and some of the biggest impressions of my life came from that age, like really strong lifelong thoughts about how life works. And so if we can reach the kids at that age and give them these really positive, beneficial thoughts about how money works and how they're best to manage it, then I think that we set them up for success. I think if we leave it to later, I think that some damage has already been done. We have to then start unpicking bad habits. And we all know how that is.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to form a good mindset from the front end, right, than to go back and try to fix something later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're real sponges, age 10 to 14. They've just got a massive ability to soak up new information, and they're really inquisitive, and they really want to know how the world works. And they're just thirsty for knowledge. Yeah. And one of the things that's actually really surprised me about having written MoneyTime and now having it used by students is just how much they do absorb. I'm not a teacher. I wasn't trained as a teacher. I've done a lot of work with companies and businesses, and I'm used to explaining stuff to people, concepts that they're not familiar with, or trying to get them to change their thought processes about something. And so I understand teaching methods and how to get a message across and how to influence people. But what really surprised me was just how easy it was to teach kids this stuff, as long as it was in a logical progression, as long as there's lots of engagement. There was, they have to do stuff pretty much all the time in MoneyTime. They've got to solve equations. They've got to click and drag words to complete sentences. They've got to answer true, false questions. They've got to answer quizzes. There's tons of interaction. And that interaction ensures that they stay engaged. And if they're engaged, then the content will go in. If they're engaged, they enjoy doing it, they'll enjoy doing it, and they'll remember it. And the penny will drop, and then that becomes institutional knowledge. I guess that's probably not a good teaching word, is it? But it becomes ingrained. It becomes part of their being, becomes part of their expectation. This is how money works. So that's, coming back to your question, I think that's another key reason why I wanted to do it at 10 to 14, is because kids are so impressionable at that age. And if we can set the plan right at the beginning, then we set them off in a really good positive direction that they're much more likely to follow than if we try and change course for them later on.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is you start at the very, very beginning. So you make no assumptions about any prior knowledge a child is coming in with. And there were even questions, honestly, when I was first going through it with Grace, I was like, that question seems a little too easy, but then she didn't know some of the answers I was sure she would know. So it's just a good reminder to just start at the very foundation, but then very quickly you were bringing them from very simple, basic concepts about, savings versus checking and different forms of income, all the way up to things thinking about investing and mortgages and how those work, which, I mean, goodness, some adults, we still have to figure that out. Like, what exactly is an interest rate and how does that work, right? So it's great to be able to start simple, but then quickly bring them to much more complex topics.
I guess that was one of the things that surprised me when I wrote the program and started testing it in schools, was how little the kids knew at that point. I just assumed they would know what interest is. I assumed they knew basically what an investment is. I assumed that they would understand that you buy houses using a mortgage, or most people do. And I got into schools and was watching them go through the modules, and I could see them scratching their head and pausing at screens. And I'm looking at the screen and going, isn't that obvious? And the answer was, no, it's not obvious. They didn't know. So I thought, okay. And I went back and rewrote the first 3 modules. It took me 3 months to write and rewrite the first 3 modules and get them to a point where I was confident that I was pitching it at the right level, which was starting completely from scratch. But like you say, once we've set the basics in place, then we move through up the progression to more interesting or complex concepts like investing, like how businesses work, warranties, guarantees, how insurance works. And these are things that most kids haven't had any exposure to, 10 to 14-year-olds. They may have vaguely heard of what insurance is, or they may have heard someone talking about CVs. So we actually just then, okay, if you don't know anything about insurance, this is how it works. This is, you pay a premium, and then if something happens later on, then you get that money paid back by the insurance company, less in excess. And they go, wow, that's seriously cool. So if our house burns down, then we don't have to pay to get it built. The insurance company is going to help. So that's it. So I guess we start basic, and then we go step by step, build them gradually up to a point where they can be confident, or we can be confident that they can understand things like security on mortgages and rates of return on shares. I think some of your listeners will be going, rates of return on shares? Okay, well, that's probably might be getting out of my comfort zone as well. You'd be really surprised, well, and it does for quite a number of parents, be really surprised how well the kids pick it up as long as explained to them in a logical fashion, build them up to that point. And then one of the things that we do in the program is, as you would have noticed, is that we've gamified it so that at the end of each module, the kids have to do a 10-question multi-choice quiz. For every correct answer, they get paid money into a virtual bank account. And as they go through the program, there's a whole bunch of things that unlock that they can spend their money on. So they can spend it on their avatar. There's half a dozen shops. Each shop gets progressively cooler gear, but it's more expensive. They can put it into a savings account and earn interest and donate it to charity, or they can invest it. And they can invest it in their education, CDs, property, stocks, and business and collectibles. Each of those investments returns an average of what you might expect in the real world. So, for example, on stocks, that averages 10%, 12%, property averages 10%. And that money gets credited to their investments. And that way they get to see it adds to their net wealth, and they see their net wealth growing. So that what we're trying to give to them there is the ability to make their own financial decisions and see the consequences of those decisions in a safe environment. So if they make a poor decision, they get to see how that translates into their net wealth in the program. And they go, oh, okay, well, maybe I could have done that better. And they look around at their peers, and we give them the ability to do that. They can look at the other peers on the leaderboard and see what their peers have done. And they go, oh, okay, so that wasn't such a smart thing to do, but maybe if I change my approach here and try something different, I'm going to get a better result. And then they learn from that. And so this whole experiential learning thing is a key part of the program. And coming back to the point where some adults might be looking at it and thinking, that's quite tough. Some of those concepts are quite tough for me, like rates of return on investment, or talking about compound interest perhaps, and sort of understanding that. When we break it down and teach them through the lessons, and then get them to experience how that works through the game, the combination of those things, actually, we're able to actually teach kids, I'm going to say, relatively sophisticated concepts in a way that they can understand. And then they go away with confidence. I know how that works. I've done that on MoneyTime. I know how that works. I've seen how that works, because I've made decisions on those things myself already, and I've seen what the consequences were. And so, I can do this. I know how money works. And that's ultimately where we're trying to get them to, is having the knowledge and the confidence to make good financial decisions as they grow up.
Yeah, so I could tell a lot about our family culture from the way Grace handled her fake money in the game, because we're fairly thrifty and we do a lot of not buying things. So she would just, even though it was like not even real, it was in the game, she was like, I don't know if I should spend this money. I think I'm just going to let it go. She refused even to spend her fake money. So that was kind of funny to me. But all right, I have a question that any parent who's watching this either live or watching the replay, they come back and they're thinking, oh, okay, wow, this is a lot of things I should be talking to my kids about. Like, what's one thing a parent could teach their children today about money that would have a positive impact on their future?
Sure. I've actually already talked about it, and that's the importance of staying out of debt or minimizing it as much as possible. I really think that's one of the biggest killers for anybody trying to get ahead financially, is having to pay off debt. You end up paying more because you're paying interest on the loan. And then while you're having to pay that off, that's an opportunity where you could have been using money to invest, to help grow your wealth. And I think we're at a point in human history where it's a lot harder to get ahead, just because of the cost of things has outpaced what people are earning, and particularly property. And it may sound like I'm spending a lot of focus on property, but that drives so much of how we experience our lives, is whether if we're owning a property or if we're renting a property to live in, the cost of that is a massive cost. It's the biggest cost we have in our lives, regardless of where we're living. And so we want to try and make that as easy as possible and as painless as possible. But if we're starting off our whole financial journey with debt, it just makes that whole property equation so much harder. And so that is the biggest piece of advice I certainly give my children, is try and minimize your debt. While you're at university, try and minimize your student loans. Go and have a good time, but don't go and eat out at restaurants. Don't go and buy the fancy sneakers. Limit the concerts that you're going to maybe a couple a year, whatever it is. Just have some discipline around it, because trust me, it will make your life a lot easier further down the track if you haven't got such a big debt to have to pay off. And I celebrate the people that can start off in their early 20s with no debt, because the world's their oyster. They've got so much opportunity then. to do stuff. You know, they can save up money to go traveling. They can save up money to buy a car. They can, and notice I said save up money to buy a car, not buy a car, you know, borrow money to get a car. They can start saving money for a deposit on a house. It just is going to make life for them so much easier if they're not starting with debt or significant debt.
Yeah, I think that's such an important concept. Certainly something we talk to our children about, you know, as we have older teens thinking about college, a lot of those decisions that they're going to be making are going to impact the next 10, 20, 30 years of their life. And so trying to help them think through those wisely and being able to, I mean, I am so thankful. I think one of the best decisions that my husband and I made, I'm thankful we have not pursued a life of debt. And that's given us freedom to be able to homeschool, right? To be able to to get all the good books. That's where I like to spend my money. That's my Achilles heel. But hey, I buy them used, right? So it's basically like I'm saving money. So I think just being able to talk to your kids about the decisions they're making now are not just about today, right? They're about how it's going to affect the next several decades of your life. And that can be tricky when you're young, right? You don't always have that long-term consequence. And that's why starting young with children, even when they're young, starting to talk to them about these ideas is certainly not too early. So can you tell people where they can find MoneyTime, why it would be a good option for a homeschool elective? And definitely, I have some links in the description here too for people to click. But tell us a little bit more about how it works. And I know you guys have won several awards recently, right? Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we won a big American award, the Eiffel Awards, which is a financial literacy award in the States. Has been going for a long time and is highly regarded. So we were really pleased to be acknowledged by that. And we also were runner-up in a big international award running out of Singapore recently. So we're absolutely chuffed knowing that we are, our program is at the forefront of financial literacy programs globally. And where listeners can get MoneyTime is at moneytimekids.com. There's a homeschoolers or for homeschool tab right at the top. So that's where we suggest you start. There's subscriptions. I think your subscribers get a discount coming through your link actually, from memory. So that would be the way to do it. Actually, go through the link on your on the bottom of the podcast or on the screen or wherever you're going to put it. And why is it a good option for homeschoolers? What we do is that MoneyTime does all the teaching for you. And so it doesn't matter what your own, as a parent, what your own financial literacy or knowledge is, or your money management experience is, we'll take care of that for you. We've done all the thinking about the best logical progression to take kids through, what represents appropriate examples, what things actually cost in real life, some realistic examples of what properties cost and what education costs and what cars cost, that sort of thing. And so we do all the teaching. You don't have to have any financial knowledge yourself. You can be confident that your kids will be taught really well the basics of personal finance. However, if you do want to be involved, and I know a lot of homeschool parents do, we have module guides available which spell out what's going to happen in the module, what the child is going to learn, what the keywords are. And then we have discussion ideas and activities that you can do together when the module's finished. And what that does is it helps them put their learning into your family's context. So it's not just an educational exercise, it's like, actually, this is real life because this is how it works in our family. And you needn't be afraid of that because the examples that we use are very easy examples, ones that the vast majority of parents would just be able to just sit down and just talk about straight away. It's general everyday finance that we all have to do. but we put it in such a way that it's a fun way of engaging with your child and explaining how insurance works for your family, or if you've borrowed money to buy your house, how that's working for you. Incidentally, we encourage parents to talk real figures, real life figures. So we talk about how much houses actually cost and how much deposit you're actually going to have to pay, and how much your education could cost. Because I think it's really important that kids know these things from the get-go, so they're not intimidated by the costs, but they're also realistic about them. I know my parents didn't tell us, me and my siblings, what things cost. I had no idea what the value of our house was, or how much my father earned for a job, or what a realistic company profit was for his company. And so, even early 20s, I still didn't know, because he refused to talk about those sorts of things. And so I was living in some sort of fantasy world where you didn't have to know what things cost, because the money just somehow would always be there. And I don't think that's a healthy way to approach it. I don't think that's a smart way to approach it. So we talk about real costs. So when I encourage your listeners, when they're talking to their kids about money, keep it real. Just be honest. And if things aren't so good financially for you, be honest about that as well. That can be a really difficult conversation to have, because most likely you're going to feel embarrassed or vulnerable or insecure about that. And that's quite normal. I promise you, there's a lot of us feel that way when we're talking about money with our kids. But at least if we're being honest, then it helps them develop a really clear understanding and expectation of how money is actually working in their family. And if it's not working well, you can, parent and child can sit there and talk through, well, what are going to be the steps that we can take with what we've learned in MoneyTime to improve that situation? And then that can produce a really positive outcome for everybody, for the whole family. Yeah. So
yeah. I love that. And I think that works so well in the context of home education, because so much of what we do is we see education as a part of our life. So it's not just sort of like this subject we do over here and it's isolated from the rest of our family life. We're always trying to find ways to integrate the things we're learning into our family culture, family discussions, just the part of what it means to be human, right? These discussions. And so I love that we can take something that could be scary to talk about, like finances, and by having a program like MoneyTime that's making it easier to kind of break the ice for us, I guess, like give us the conversation starters and help us kind of get over that hump to just start the conversation. And I think that because of that, it would be something, even if you had children of other ages, I think it would be something that would benefit and be of value to the whole family, not just to the kid, in the 10 to 14 year age range who's taking the class themselves. So.
Absolutely. The content is applicable to 10 through to adult. It really, honestly, is applicable to anybody over 10 years old. And what older kids might find is that the way we present it, the graphics and the animation or lack of it is probably a bit simplistic for older kids, but the message and the content is 100% applicable. So I've had plenty of teachers and parents say, I learned tons with my child or with my students going through MoneyTime. Thank you.
Yes, it's the investment you do for your kids, but you're secretly listening and learning alongside them.
Yeah, and it's fun. I think one of the really important things for anybody when they're learning something is to enjoy what they're doing, is to enjoy the experience. And so I've interlaced a fair bit of humour into the program. Hopefully you picked that up on that. But and it'd be interesting if the New Zealand sense of humour carries over to the Canadian, North American sense of humour. I actually surprise myself. I actually laugh out loud sometimes when I'm going back to the program and I see something I put in there. I make myself laugh. I thought that's really funny.
That's really funny. Well, it's always more fun to learn with joy and learn with humor. I think it helps us retain the information too. Neil,
Sure.
thank you so much for chatting with us today. I'm excited to be able to let the humility and doxology audience know more about MoneyTime. Be sure, if you are watching this video, if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments and I'll make sure they get to Neil. And click the link to find out more details about MoneyTime and how it can be a good fit for you in your homeschool this year. Talk to you later.